Would you say the mind body that we have is defaulted because it's in this physical environment and it needs to eat and breathe and protect itself, that most of the time it's in a protective, fear-based kind of mental construct, and very little of this by default isn't about possibility, isn't about, and so what we see is always looking for how we can survive, how we can avoid pain.
Yeah, and this cuts across both East and West. Both would agree, because that is the kind of the understanding that the studies of the mind give us, is that we're conditioned by our past experiences.
Hello, welcome to Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Debra Maldonado.
I'm Dr. Rob.
And we are the founders of Creative Mind University, which brings you the flagship Jungian coaching training program. And today we are continuing our series on consciousness, non-dual consciousness, and neuroscience. It's going to be an interesting topic. I do want to remind you before we begin to subscribe to our channel if you haven't done that already, if you're watching us on YouTube, or if you are listening to us on the podcast services, make sure you subscribe to our podcast to get every episode.
All right.
So continuing our series, Rob, on consciousness. So I thought today we're going to talk about the self-luminous consciousness. We're going to talk about what that is and why it's important for you to know.
Yeah, because it will set us up to understand Maya, which is the next installment.
Yes.
But if we understand consciousness, or at least the way it works in the world, then we have a pretty good chance of understanding Maya, which is a little bit more difficult to understand, let's say.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So, Rob, can you just give everyone a level set of what we mean by consciousness? Because some people believe it's just what you're conscious aware of, your awakened state, but how we refer to consciousness from a non-dual perspective.
Yeah, and for those of you that are new to the program, we're approaching it from a psychological perspective. My background, my training is in neuropsychology. I worked as a psychologist for many years. And so that's our approach, right? That we're looking at it from the psychological perspective of Western science, but we're also acknowledging that Eastern philosophy had a much more sophisticated understanding of consciousness that we can look at and apply to our everyday life. And this is key, that we want this stuff to be practical for us. If we can't put it to work for us, then it's useless, right? It's beautiful stuff that scholars can study, but no, this stuff is really practical, as you'll see, or hopefully we will be able to show you that it's practical. So what is consciousness? In Eastern philosophy, consciousness is not emanating from the brain as we see it in Western psychology. In other words, it's not a secondary or something that arises from all our neurons in the brain firing together and in patterns and creating consciousness. That's not how they saw it. The way they saw it, the way the seers of ancient India saw it, is that consciousness is a fundamental property of creation, of the universe, of everything we know and understand. It predates, it's the primordial element of creation. Then what we see as the universe, as matter, as the world, arises within that primordial consciousness. So it's reversed. In the West, we see it as first there was matter, and then animals evolved and human beings evolved, and then this thing called awareness or consciousness emerged from brains. That's not how they saw it. It's the opposite. So this primordial consciousness is at the heart of who we are. And that's the practicality, that it's telling us right now, who are you? Who is the one listening? Who is the one thinking about the things that Debbie and Dr. Rob are talking about? That you experience is consciousness. It's pure consciousness, pure awareness. or as we like to call it, or because as the Upanishads state, consciousness is the self. It's the universal self in you.
So the pure being,
pure beingness,
the kind of the collective being, or everything that arises is connected to that one source. And that's where the non-dual element comes in, that there's not two. There's not consciousness and then a material world. There is actually, we're one with everything. So we are part of the computer, the people, listening to us. We are a reflection of something in you, like all the time. So, I love this idea too, because, we teach the Jungian model of individuation, and it really makes sense the way Jung saw a person is that we're all like connected and reflecting on each other, versus there's other people out there that we have that are separate from us. And he started to see that unifying force that connects us all. So that connectedness, and which I think is very scary at some points, but also very beautiful. So with that, my question to you, Rob, is, so if we're all consciousness and it's pure awareness, so is it aware of itself?
Oh yeah, that's an ongoing debate in consciousness studies. But according to especially Adi Shankara, who is the prime philosopher of non-dual Vedanta, he would say yes, consciousness is aware of itself. And here's a little thought experiment that we can do, again, to show the practicality of this. When I was in college, there was this, they set up this tank with, I can't remember the name of the psychologist now, but it was a psychologist who developed this isolation tank. And what it was filled with salt water that would, you would float in it, essentially. You would be weightless in it. And when it was closed, it was a tank with that water in it. When they closed the door, it would be completely dark, pitch dark. No light would enter the pod. And so you would be floating, and you'd feel like you were weightless, and there would be no sound, no light, nothing coming in. I would essentially hear my heartbeat. That was the only sound that I could hear.
So it's like a sensory deprivation.
That's right.
I know that Michael Jackson was known to have one of those.
Oh, this was way before.
It was like in the 90s. I remember people talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we also experience this sometimes at night, right? When all the lights are out, and if the room is really dark and you're very still and there's nothing happening, you might experience this where you open your eyes and you can't see anything, and there's not much sound, and so you're kind of in this darkness, enveloped by the darkness. The question is then, or like if you're in that isolation tank, the question is, are you aware that you're aware if you open your eyes? And so you're not seeing any objects, you're not hearing any sound, you're not necessarily receiving a lot of sensory stimulation from your body. Are you aware that you're aware at that moment? In other words, are you aware that you're awake, right? And even though there's no sensory data to experience, and the answer is yes. Most of us understand that if I open my eyes and I don't see anything, hear anything, there's kind of a self-reflective element that I know I'm awake, right? That I'm searching for objects to experience or to see, but that there are none right now. That it's dark, or that I'm in an isolation tank, and therefore I'm not going to see anything. But I'm awake. I'm aware.
So are you saying that most people define being aware of something if they can identify objects?
That's right.
So we feel like we're aware if we can see or taste or touch something or feel something.
Yeah, and in the West, that's such a simple mistake that we make. We think
Mm-hmm.
that awareness involves perception of an object, right? That I'm thinking of something, that I'm perceiving something, that I'm
Or
involved
even
in
feeling something, right?
feeling something, trying to solve some problem. We think that's consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
The engagement with a thought, an object, a perception, a memory, we think that's consciousness. But Eastern philosophy says that's not consciousness. That's your mind, in your thoughts. You're observing. In other words, consciousness is observing your mind having a thought or you experiencing an object, which is very different, right? It kind of it's stepping one layer back instead of thinking that consciousness is our cognitive function. Consciousness is the observer, the witness of our mind experiencing objects, our mind experiencing thoughts, our mind experiencing emotions.
So I was listening to something earlier today, and they said that the thing of the mind, like what our mind, we can look at things from the mind's perspective, which is the mind body, or
Mm.
we can look things from a spiritual perspective, which is the awareness from the self. So would that be a good way to think about it for people that are trying to like figure this out? Is I like to think about that I'm aware there's this body and this personality named Debra that's having this life experience.
Mm.
But if I identify with Debra, I'm like in the world and reacting to the world. But if I identify as the self watching Debra have this experience, it gives us a little more peace, a little more, almost like taking life less hard and serious and feeling less powerful because we are in this place of, possibility and then no, like not so attached to this person and this body, which is an Eastern perspective.
Not only that, in the in Shankara's philosophy, he would say, what you're doing is you're experiencing reality.
Hmm.
That is the reality. Whereas when we're caught up in the sensory experience only, we're caught up in a dream-like state, in an apparent reality that is our mind. Our mind is making it up because we know this, and this hard neuroscience would agree with this, that our mind is the one that creates the the appearance of the world for us.
Hmm.
It doesn't exist the way we see it out there. We're creating it. We're bringing the color, the texture, the sound, the feel, the meaning. All that is
So our
created in
memories are
mind.
like almost like when we see someone that looks like someone we know, we have a memory that we project onto that person, like projecting all
Yeah.
these, the past experience onto those objects. So if we got in a car accident and it was bad, and then we see a car, we immediately might project fear into that experience, where someone who didn't experience that, you know, some kind of trauma, they wouldn't see that. They would see just a car. And so that's why we all have individual experiences, but we are all seeing the same, a lot of times the same objects.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what it does, like you say, there's kind of a protective layer there, or
Mm-hmm.
a kind of creating a little buffer between what we're experiencing and the true self. And Shankara says that is reality. In other words, when you're experiencing reality, you're not you're not manipulated by the appearance of things to such an extent that you're kind of in a delusional state.
Mm-hmm.
In mental health, we would call that schizophrenia or some kind of mental health disorder, because when you're caught up, you're not seeing things as they really are. So the
Well,
Upanishads say we mistake the unreal, which is our own mental interpretation, for the real, which is the absolute consciousness that is the real experiencer, or the one that is allowing the mind to experience these things.
Would you say the mind body that we have is defaulted because it's in this physical environment and it needs to eat and breathe and protect itself, that most of the time it's in a protective, fear-based kind of mental construct, and very little of this by default isn't about possibility, isn't about, and so the what we see is always looking for how we can survive, how we can avoid pain, how we can move away from it, and kind of mechanize, like fear is kind of our root when we're inside the body and don't remember that we're the self.
Yeah, and this cuts across both East and West. Both would agree, because that is the kind of the understanding that the studies of the mind give us, is that we're conditioned by our past experiences. And that conditioning early on is very much geared towards personal survival. In other words, we're interpreting everything as to what is good for me and what is bad for me. What's not going to help me survive and what will help me survive. And whatever helps us survive in our particular individual environments, we take that on as, I got to hold on to this as this is real or this is important, right? And then our mind then makes our current interpretation. Let's say I go to a new city and I'm experiencing new things for the first time. I'm interpreting all these new experiences through the lens of my past conditioning. And so filtering everything through that past conditioning of survival, of socially fitting in.
And wouldn't you say the mind body prioritizes the fear? That would be like the priority. And then all the other, like looking at like possibilities or looking at like the good things in life. Like you're walking down the street and your mind is going to notice where danger is or where things that disgust you that you want to avoid. And it doesn't, unless you consciously direct your mind, it won't look for like the person giving and being generous on the street or someone who's kind and smiles back. Like your mind will create walking down the street in a certain way based on that priority. Unless you're, like I said, unless you're conscious and intentional, that I'm going to go down the street and look for all the good in the world.
Oh, that's a good question. Unless you free your mind from past conditioning. This both the East and the West agree upon, that if you're able to transcend your conditioning, in other words, you're able to understand that you are not your thoughts, that your thoughts are essentially like an app turning on in your mind that helps you navigate the world, instead of that you are experiencing the world directly. This is a weird understanding, right? But it's no accident that we created our computers and our phones and all this technology the way we did, because it reflects that reality, that we can think of our ego, our self, like our small self, as an app that turns on when we go outside and we're walking on the street, and that app is giving us information about the world and objects in the world and interpreting that for us. But it's very much geared to its program based on our past conditioning, our past experiences, and therefore kind of tailoring the information to make sense for us and to kind of fit the narrative of who we think we are.
So it fits. So it makes sense to us. Even if it's not what we want, it makes sense.
That's right.
So if we feel unworthy, we're going to see and have events in our life that prove that to ourselves. So, back in early in my days as doing personal growth, it was all about reprogramming. So we can update the app and we could say, okay, this app is going to run on a new program, but it's like still the same app. With Jung's individuation, when you say break free of past patterns, we're actually, would you say, creating our own app by our own design, like a fresh new software, a fresh new mechanism that we see the world, and it has like higher information. It has, we don't identify with the past memories that we have as us and as real. And we can basically create a new app to run the world, play in our life.
Yeah, I think that's possible. But the bigger payoff is that you realize that you're not the app, which
Yeah.
is itself a much more liberating, direct experience.
Can I ask you this though? Do we need an app? We still need an app, don't we, to
Yeah.
operate? So maybe the first step is I think I'm an app, but I'm updating. And then the other stage is where I'm not the app itself, but I'm using the app to integrate, to live, to experience the world. But I know I'm working through an app. It's not really who I am. But that would be a more enlightened way of working with the mind and mindset and creating.
Yes, but we would also see that the app is very flexible, and that we can essentially design it or apply it the way we choose, which is a direct kind of experience of freedom. Because think of how limiting it is to only see the world through that app of our past conditioning. It's a very narrow sliver of reality that we're kind of locked into, and we're not able to go beyond it because it feels very dangerous. The ego has like a defense mechanism that says if you step outside the app of your ego, you're in danger.
You're going to be erased.
Yeah, you might get lost and never be able to kind of reformulate that sense of self. But that's not really the case. Consciousness, the Upanishads emphasize, and Shankaras emphasize that consciousness cannot be damaged by human experience. It's completely free.
Can you break the app?
You can't break it.
It still runs.
Well, let's say you can't break consciousness, and if we ask what is the app made out of, it's made out of consciousness. It's simply like taking that shape and that form.
So it's a limited expression of consciousness. So it's almost like, when you get your phone and they say, do you want 64 kilobytes, or do you want 128, or do you want a terabyte of memory? You decide like how big, you want to store. And so it's almost like that, where we have this more space to create more ideas, more room to evolve, versus the little app that's like, you're out of memory right now. You got to delete some old files and, create new ones, but you're still limited by that small memory. I know we're getting geeky here with the computer. So we have this consciousness, that's who we are. We have the mind body, which is our app that we run from default from our childhood. And as we individuate, we can evolve the app we're operating from, like our operating system kind of thing.
Yeah.
So when we do that, and we're in consciousness, and there's objects in consciousness that are part of us. How does consciousness become those objects that we see in the world? And how, from a practical standpoint, let's use money, for example. Everyone can relate. They look at their bank account, their little app is showing them they have, $1,000 in their savings. They would be like, wow, it would be nice to have $1 million in my savings. How does someone change the objects in the world so they can have that reality?
Yeah. So
I'm sorry, throwing you questions at you.
No,
you're like, okay.
I always like the difficult questions, but also the practical ones, right? That show us this is applicable to our everyday life, which is finances, relationships, mind, body, wellness, as well as the deeper spiritual questions. This knowledge applies to all these things. So let's back up a little bit. If we ask, what is the true nature of money? Here's where this knowledge becomes very practical. If we don't understand what it is, right? In other words, if we're caught up to seeing money from the perspective of the app, of the ego, and we think, well, it's something that's out there independent of my mind. In other words, it's in the bank, it's in the businesses, and et cetera, et cetera. And I have nothing to do with the amounts except kind of my engagement with work or the bank and that kind of stuff, right? The way it appears to us from our sensory experience. That's not a good way to approach it, because you're misreading the reality, the true reality of money. You're seeing it only as a limited object in the world. Therefore, that's
And that
not
if
very
you have
practical.
more, you're taking it from someone else. I think there's a finite resource.
That too, yeah. And so it's not a practical approach to living and to understanding finances. So already you're at a disadvantage. You're misreading the game. You're not understanding what the true nature of the game is. So this knowledge, what it does, first of all, it corrects that misperception so that you understand, like any object in the universe, money is a mental construct. That's the only way it exists for us. It's a mental construct.
But Dr. Rob, I see, my bank account and I look
Right.
at it and it's the numbers right there. How could you say that's a mental experience? I know I got my paycheck last month. I know how much I paid and this is how much is left over. So
Yeah.
how could you say that is in my mind?
Yeah. So this is another simple thought experiment that we can use. Ask yourself, do I ever experience money without my consciousness or without my awareness? In other words, do I ever feel that I got a paycheck? Do I ever see the bank account? Do I ever spend money without experiencing it through my awareness? So the answer is no. We never experience money outside of awareness. Now, when two things are coupled together, that we can't separate them. So they never appear separate. They're always together. We can logically conclude that they must be one and the same thing. That money and consciousness are one and the same, identical thing, not different.
Well, here's another experiment I would think, and let me know if you agree down
Sure.
this line. Is it a person can look at that balance of $1,000 and feel like they have a lot of money, be like, wow, that's based on their past memory. Or they
Mm-hmm.
can look at that $1,000 and freak out like, I have little money, or be like neutral about it. So we end up having an idea of how much money we perceive we can make or have in our life. And then we measure that when we see the bank account, it kind of fits what our expectations are. And then if we see too much, there must be a mistake or you feel guilty or whatever it is. It's like a mental idea. And so by default, we create the amount of money in our life that we assume we can create.
That's a good way to put it. Yes, because now we can say, okay, there's three elements, but remember, all these three elements are one. We have pure consciousness, we have the mind, the individual mind, right, with its little ego app, and then the appearance of the world, of the bank and other people and businesses and money out there. All these three are one. Now, if we realize that, then we understand that what we're dealing with, that yes, it's an appearance, and where's the appearance coming from? From the modulations of our mind. In other words, the way, like you say, the way we're thinking about it. That I'm only meant to make this certain amount of money, and any more than that, I would be greedy, or I would be shunned by my family, and
Taking
a lot of
from
this stuff.
others,
Yeah, and a lot of
a
this stuff
bad
is
person.
unconscious, of course.
Yeah.
In other words, we're kind of running on conditioning, past conditioning, and therefore that past conditioning is playing into the modulation of our individual mind, and therefore the way money appears to us reflects that modulation in a direct way. So that if you believe you're not worthy of being wealthy or successful, that the world is going to appear that way to you. It's going to appear as if I was right. I'm not worthy of it, and I'll never create it. But if you believe, let's say, or if you are able to free your mind from the conditioning enough to open it up and say, there's possibilities for me, right? There's opportunities. And if I do these things or I express my work this way, there's a pretty good chance that I will see wealth and abundance. Then you start to experience those things as well.
I want to take it to another level too, because a lot of our clients are not worried about like making $1,000. They're, pretty successful, but they don't have the they don't love what they do. And so money also can be kind of the golden handcuffs where you're attached to, let's say you have 100,000 in your savings and you don't want to leave your job because you like having that comfort. That is almost the same at like kind of limitation around money than someone who thinks $1,000 isn't enough, because you're still operating from that same mind that the money is somehow separate or it's in the job. And if I leave my job, a lot of people want to, like we see, leave their very successful jobs or their careers to become coaches or to be entrepreneurs or do something they love that fill their heart with, joy. But it's the money, whether it's lack or abundance, like that's a blessing or a curse, that it locks them into, I can only make money if I work really hard, or if I only work in this kind of job. I can't be an entrepreneur because I've never done that before.
Right. Yeah. So security is really important for our natural brain, right? Our conditioned mind. Security, because it's related to survival, is deemed really important. Way up high, right, on the values.
That priority. Yeah. So when we say that, just to clarify my question, is like we said that we project meaning into that number. We create our reality. So what I see, and I know when I left the corporate world, and so many people I know have left the corporate world or thinking about leaving to do something they love, which is most of our clients. Yeah. There's this kind of that idea that I'm not sure if I can make it work in the other sector, or I was really successful here. Can I do something else? And it's about the app again, about changing the app or the person that's experiencing that reality. Like you can have the app of the corporate person. And so we have to evolve into have the app of the entrepreneur or the coach or the thought leader.
Yeah. Yeah. It would require, let's say in practical terms, what it gives us is a narrative, a narrative about who we are. Like my history is thus, I went to this particular school, my family was thus, and I had a certain amount of siblings, et cetera, et cetera. So that narrative, if we never understand it as a narrative and we think it's reality, then we can't change it, because we're saying, how can I change what happened to me and who I am, right? It's like that, or
the world, like there's a economy in the world, and if the economy's bad, then I'm kind of limited to my opportunities, or because of my education, I'm limited to my opportunities, those type of things.
Right. It becomes like a hard shell that we're locked into, that narrative. So we're locked into a particular point of view, a particular worldview that includes how successful we are going to be and how happy we're going to feel doing certain things. So the key to changing that is to understand, to understand the nature of it. Again, and if we don't understand the nature of mind, that we think we're experiencing a reality out there that is independent of our mind, we're kind of limiting ourselves, because it's going to be very difficult for us to change the world. All we can do, right, in that case, is wait for the world to change.
Or, like I say, rearrange the furniture and make your life more comfortable, or adjust or cope.
Or
and those
cope.
things are great. You can cope with your life and cope with things that are happening and find a way to
Yeah.
survive. But we want to create. And so before we go, I want to kind of wrap up with this idea of the self-luminous consciousness. And so how does this all fit into someone who understands that they're
Mhm.
a part of their consciousness, they're part of that self-luminous, meaning that you're lighting your own light, you're shining your own light on the world. Is that how you would say it?
I think that's a good metaphor for understanding it. Is
Hmm.
that what we're seeing is our own mind, and that there
Hmm.
is no difference between what we call the world and our mind. And what
When I was reading a book years ago, like probably before I even met you, I was reading like some kind of Eastern philosophy book. And as I was reading it, I realized it was probably, I think it was a neuroscience book actually. And they were saying, which is very similar now. I was like, the light out there that I'm witnessing isn't coming from out there. It's actually me being the light. Like when you close your eyes, everything's dark. When you open your eyes, there's light. So I
yeah.
started getting that idea. Like that's a simple way to think about it, is that when you close your eyes, it's all dark. When you open your eyes, you illuminate the world. And, or I guess if you're blind, then there's another way. You illuminate it with your own consciousness. You create a visual in your mind, but
Yeah.
it's that same kind of idea. And that kind of freaked me out a little bit, that I'm the light, like you are the
Mhm.
light of the world kind of thing.
Yeah, the philosophy and knowledge is a little challenging because we never have a direct experience of it. The
Mm,
way the world appears to us, it appears to be separate from me, right? These objects are all distinct and separate. And when I don't see them, my hypothesis is that they're still there, but I can't prove that. Like,
mm,
there's no way to prove that these things remain as they are when I don't see them, when I walk
mm.
out of the room.
When no one's looking at that room,
Yeah.
does the tree, do you hear the tree fall in the forest if no one's there to listen
Well,
to it,
well,
basically?
that one we solved actually in the West. Like, we know the light and the sound are not really there when there's no one to perceive it. In other words, if I
Mm.
leave the music full blast on, I put Led Zeppelin on full blast in the room, and I walk out,
And Debbie says, that music is so loud.
there's no music in the room. If I'm not here to hear it, there is no music in the room. All there is vibration.
Hmm.
In other words, that music doesn't really exist except as a mental
And then if a
experience.
pet listens to it, let's say a pet has ears or something,
They would
or
hear something. Yeah.
or a bug has
Something
has
different.
senses, they would hear something different. They wouldn't hear
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin; they'd hear something else. So,
That's right. So it's a subjective reality,
mm,
whereas we think, right, the way it appears to us, that it's an objective reality. In other words, that, oh, of course, everybody is going to hear and experience the same thing. So
mm,
that's the trick right there, to understand that what we are experiencing is our own creation. And as you own that, then you're able to change it the way to the way you want to experience it, right?
so final question.
Mm-hmm.
So, do we have the power to change our bank account from 1,000 to 1,000,000?
Yes,
Okay,
not in a
not
magical,
overnight, not
right,
by a genie.
right, not in that sense, but by understanding the true nature of reality, then we can work in a more sane way. Because
Mm,
what happens when we're misperceiving it, it's going to drive us a little bit nuts, because we're expecting one thing, but we know the nature of the world is always going to be up and down, and therefore we're going to be caught off guard, and we're
mm,
going to think that our success depends on these external appearances, instead of understanding that no, our success depends on our thoughts, our self-conception, our understanding
mm.
of who we are.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
it's not, when we talk about that self-conception, it's not, oh, I'm worthy now or I'm good enough now. It's actually that you're the self,
yeah,
not you're the app, the character that's playing.
yeah,
Yeah, I love
that's
that.
right.
And so next week, we're going to continue this topic because it's so interesting and mind-blowing, is the concept of Maya. And this Eastern philosophy, this idea of the moving world, and how can the immovable be moved, and how we use the concept of Maya help me understand how the world gets created. And I think it'll, if you haven't heard about Maya, or if you have, this may give you a more practical understanding of it.
That's right.
So
it's all very practical.
Yes, it's all very practical. So anyway, great topic today, Rob, and we'll see you next week on Soul Sessions.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.